Chapter 12. Henry Jekyll's Story. I, Dr. Henry Jekyll, was born in the year 1830. My family was rich. I studied to be a doctor. I liked the hard work. Other people soon had a good opinion of me, and I liked that too. I seemed to have a good future in front of me. Everything looked bright and good. My worst problem was my love of fun. I enjoyed the wild nightlife too much. Many people have found that a love of fun helps them to enjoy life. I wanted to seem serious, and this did not help, so I was careful to hide this side of my life. In this way, my life became a lie. Even before I finished my studies, I already had a double life. My actions were not serious, but I did not want them to be a part of my working life. The years passed, and I grew older and more sensible, but it was too late to change my double life. And then, through my scientific studies, I learned something important. I learned that man has two sides, a good side and an evil side. I knew that this was true of me. I was honest about it. As a doctor, I tried to learn more and to help sick and suffering people. The other part of me was also honest about its search. Slowly it became clear to me that man is not just one person. He is two people. Can I separate the two sides? I asked myself. Can I make two people, one good, one bad, from a single person? If I can, life will be much easier. The bad person can live in his own bad way without hurting the good person and people's opinion of him, and the good person's good name will be in no danger because of the other person's bad actions. It seems wrong that we have to live with both persons in the same body. At that time, I was doing some scientific work. I found that some chemicals have a great power. They can change a person's body. They can change its shape and make it bigger or smaller. I do not want to be too clear about the scientific part of this story. My reason? Because, as my story will show, my experiments were not completed. It was a long time before I decided to try the chemicals. There were too many things that could go wrong. I was afraid of dying. But finally, I had to know. I had to have the answer. My experiments showed me the liquid that was necessary. Then I bought from Moore and Company, the chemists, a lot of the special salt chemical that I needed to put into it. Late one night, I carefully put the salt chemical and liquid into a glass and mixed them together. I watched the liquid change color. Then, nervously, I drank what was in the glass. I felt terrible pain and a great sickness. But then, quite quickly, the pain went away and I began to feel better. I felt younger, lighter, happier, and free in my body. My mind felt free too, but I knew immediately that I was more evil than every other man on earth. How did I know this? I do not know, but it was a wonderful feeling, like the taste of the best wine. I looked down at my body. I saw immediately that I was smaller than before. There was no mirror in my workroom then. I brought it in later. So that night I went quickly across the dark courtyard and into the house. It was after midnight. All my servants were asleep, so they did not see me. I went quietly up to my bedroom and straight to my mirror. In it, for the first time, I saw the man that I decided to call Edward Hyde. He was much smaller and younger than Henry Jekyll. I can only believe that the evil side of me was not fully grown. It was not as strong as my good side. The worst part of me was not as old and tired as the good and honest part. The ugly face in the mirror was an evil face. I knew that. But I felt no fear. I welcomed it, because it seemed very natural. The face looked more alive than my usual face. Later, I realized that people could not come near me without a feeling of great dislike. They hated me before I even spoke. This is probably because they have never met a man like Edward Hyde. He is a man who is all bad, all evil, I told myself. Most people are good and bad. Now came the next part of my experiment. I returned to my workroom and prepared the chemical again, and drank it. Once again, I suffered the terrible pains of change, but I soon had the face and body of Henry Jekyll. That night, my life changed forever. The experiment was a success, and from that time I was two people. One was Edward Hyde, a man completely evil. The other man was dear old Henry Jekyll. As time passed, I felt a greater and greater need to escape into the younger, more exciting body of Edward Hyde. And it was so easy. I only had to drink the liquid, and there I was, in my new life. I prepared everything carefully. As Hyde, I took the house in Soho and employed a woman. She looked after it and asked no questions. As Jekyll, I described Mr. Hyde and told my servants, "Mr. Hyde can use my house in the square when he wants to use it." I visited the house 2 or 3 times as Mr. Hyde, so there were no mistakes. His visits became quite usual. At times, Henry Jekyll was shocked and frightened by the things that Edward Hyde did. But only Hyde did wrong. Jekyll was not worse than before the experiment. He often tried to correct the wrong things that were done by Hyde. Then I made the will that you did not like. Why did I make it? Because I wanted to be able to change from Dr. Jekyll to Edward Hyde without losing all my money. I would not like to describe everything that I did as Edward Hyde, but I will tell you about one accident. It happened one night. I knocked down a child, and this made another man very angry. I saw the man the other day. He is your friend. The child's family were very angry too. For a time I was afraid that they wanted to kill me. But Edward Hyde calmed them. He brought them to the workroom door and gave them a cheque from Henry Jekyll. But most of the time, everything seemed perfect. If I was in trouble as Hyde, I only had to escape into my workroom through the door in the narrow street. I only needed a minute to make and drink the liquid. Then Edward Hyde disappeared. In his place, sitting quietly at his desk, was good, honest Henry Jekyll. Edward Hyde was an evil man. Slowly his actions got worse and worse. Then, 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers Carew, I, Henry Jekyll, went out one evening and returned late. When I woke up the next morning, I looked down at my hand. The skin on it was darker, and it was half covered in thick hair. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. I looked at it for almost a minute before I jumped out of bed. I ran to the mirror and looked at my face. Yes, there it was. There was no mistake. I went to bed as Henry Jekyll, but I have woken up as Edward Hyde, I thought. How could it happen? What went wrong? And what am I going to do? All my chemicals were in my workroom, but I had to get to them. It was late in the morning, and my servants were already working in the house. But I had to go through the house and across the courtyard. Then I remembered. Of course, I thought. The servants have seen Edward Hyde in the house before now. And I laughed. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. One of my servants saw me. He looked a little shocked when he saw Edward Hyde so early in the day, but he said nothing. I hurried across the courtyard as fast as I could. I went straight to my workroom and quickly mixed the liquid. Then I drank it. 10 minutes later, Dr. Jekyll returned to the house for his breakfast. Chapter 13. The end of the story. After this, I began to think more seriously about my 2 different lives. When I was Henry Jekyll, I knew very well about Mr. Hyde's activities, and I began to see a new danger. Hyde is becoming too evil, too strong, I thought. Perhaps a time will come soon when I will not be able to change back to Dr. Henry Jekyll. Hyde will have too much power. I shall be with him for the rest of my life. I knew that it was a real danger. Sometimes I had to make the liquid 2 or 3 times stronger than usual before I could change back from Hyde to Dr. Jekyll. I had to choose between these 2, Jekyll or Hyde. Jekyll did not have the excitement, the almost pleasant dangers of Hyde's life. But Hyde did not work as a doctor. He was hated, and he had no friends. I decided not to bring Hyde back again. I preferred the old and perhaps boring doctor with his friends, I decided. So I said goodbye to Hyde. I missed feeling younger. I missed the excitement of Hyde's life. But for 2 months I did not bring him back. Then, in an hour of weakness, I went to my workroom and made the terrible liquid, and brought him back again. I was frightened by what happened next. Hyde was a prisoner for 2 months, so now he was like a wild animal. I could feel the new power of his evil ways. He wanted to shout and scream and hurt somebody. Then I met the unlucky Sir Danvers Carew in the street. He asked me a simple question, and I enjoyed hitting him again and again. I only stopped when I was tired. I looked down at the broken body of the old man, and suddenly I felt fear. Hyde was in danger. Hyde had to get away. I ran through the dark shadows of the streets to my house in Soho. I was shaking with fear and excitement. When I got to the house, I destroyed all my papers. Then I went out into the streets again and hurried to my workroom. There I felt safe. I sang a song as I mixed the chemical and the liquid. I drank it and thought of the dead man, and laughed and laughed. After the terrible pain of change ended, I, as Henry Jekyll, fell down onto my knees because I was that good man again. I covered my face. I wanted to scream loudly when I thought of the terrible murder of that poor old man. Tears poured from my eyes. I asked God to forgive me. Next day, the newspapers were full of the story of the murder of Sir Danvers Carew. I read all of them. I learned for the first time that someone watched the murder from a window, and now the police had the name of the murderer, Edward Hyde. The Carew murder made my future clear. It was impossible to bring Hyde back, because the world was looking for him. The world was waiting to take the life of a murderer. I will never bring him back again, I told myself. I locked the door from the workroom to the street and broke the key. I have finished with evil, I promised myself. I will work harder. I will help weak, ill, and suffering people. You know that I tried to do this during the last months of last year. I never dreamed of bringing the terrible Edward Hyde back again. On a fine, clear January day, when there was not one cloud in the sky, I was sitting in the sun in Regent's Park. I was resting after a hard morning's work. The birds were singing, and my mind was not busy. Perhaps I was sleepily remembering happier days when I was young. Suddenly, I had feelings of pain, sickness, and shock. When the pain left me, I looked down. My clothes were hanging over the smaller body and legs of Edward Hyde. I could not believe it. A minute before, I was safe, rich, and loved. The good, honest Dr. Jekyll. Now, suddenly, I was the man that everybody was looking for. A man without a home. A murderer. I had to change back again, and quickly, before somebody saw me. But how could I get the chemicals that I needed? They were in my workroom, and the street door to the workroom was locked. I could not go into the house from the square. Everyone was looking for Mr. Hyde, my servants too. What can I do, I thought. Hyde's mind was quicker than Jekyll's. He thought of Lanyon. How can I reach him, I thought, and how can I, Hyde, ask him to steal things from his friend, Dr. Jekyll? Then I remembered something, and I laughed. I can still write a letter in my handwriting, I thought, and I knew immediately what I had to do. I walked out of the park and stopped a passing taxi, then drove to Portland Street. The driver looked at the clothes that did not fit me. He was clearly amused, but he said nothing. In Portland Street, I went to a cheap hotel and asked for a private room. The man at the hotel desk looked at my clothes and smiled, but the look on my face quickly took the smile from his mouth. I asked for some paper, and he gave it to me. Then I went to the room. There I sat at a table and wrote 2 letters, one to Lanyon and one to Poole. Then I paid a servant at the hotel, and he took them. The rest of the day was a time of great fear. Most of the time I sat alone in the hotel room. A waiter brought my dinner to me. Then I sat by the fire. When it was dark, I left the hotel. I walked through the empty streets of the city until midnight. I walked quickly and stayed in the shadows. Once a woman spoke to me, but I hit her across the face and she ran away. I changed back to myself, to Dr. Jekyll, at Lanyon's house. He was shocked, and the fear on my old friend's face hurt me. He was angry with me, of course, but the memory of those terrible hours as Hyde frightened me most. I was terribly afraid. Not afraid of a murderer's death, but afraid of being Hyde. I listened to Lanyon's angry words, but I seemed to be in a dream, and I seemed to walk home and go to my bed in that same dream. I slept well at home. In the morning I felt weak, but calm. I hated the evil man who slept inside me, but I was at home in my own house again, near the chemicals that I needed. After breakfast, I walked across the courtyard to my workroom. I was enjoying the cold but clear air. Then, suddenly, I began to change and to hide again. I realized immediately what was happening. I had enough time to reach my room over the workroom. Then I was filled with the power of Hyde's evil. I worked quickly, but I had to take double the usual amount of the liquid before I was Jekyll again. 6 hours after that, the pain and the change returned, and again I had to take the liquid. From that day, only the chemical kept Hyde away. At all hours of the day and night, I felt pain and suffered the change. When I slept, I woke up as Hyde. Even if I fell half asleep for a minute in my chair, the same thing happened. I was afraid to sleep, but when I stayed awake, the change still came. When the power of the chemical became weak, I became Hyde. Without sleep, and with the terrible fear, my health began to leave me. And as Jekyll got weaker, Hyde grew stronger. Now a last terrible thing has happened. I sent Poole for more chemicals when the chemicals from Moore and Company were nearly finished. I mixed them with the liquid, but they were not strong enough. The color of the liquid was different. I drank it, but nothing happened. Poole will tell you that he searched London for more chemicals. I believe now that there was something in those first chemicals. It was not there in the other chemicals. That unknown something gave the chemical its power. About a week has passed. I am using the last of the old chemicals so I can write this to you. This is the last time that Henry Jekyll will have his own mind. He will not see his face, now terribly changed and old, in the mirror again. And I must bring my story to an end quickly. If the change comes now, Hyde will destroy this letter. But if I have already finished it, he will be too busy. He has to think of a way to escape the death of a murderer. Will Hyde hang as a murderer? Or will he be brave? Will he kill himself and escape that death? I do not know. This is my real hour of death. The future will happen to another person. Here, then, I am putting my pen down, and I am ending the life of the unhappy Henry Jekyll.